Have you ever wondered how the ancient Egyptians found peace in a world without modern comforts? Picture this. You're standing at the edge of a sacred lake at dawn, watching priests emerge from the cool waters, their bodies glistening as the first rays of sunlight dance across the surface. For thousands of years, the people of ancient Egypt used water not just for survival, but as a powerful tool for spiritual cleansing, mental peace, and connection to their gods. These weren't just simple baths, they were carefully crafted rituals that transformed ordinary water into something sacred, something that could wash away more than just dirt. Before we go back in time together, if you're enjoying settling in for the night with a bit of Egyptian history, consider hitting subscribe. And I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from right now? And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Why did water mean everything to the ancient Egyptians? The answer lies not in religious texts alone, but in the very survival of their civilization. Egypt was called the gift of the Nile by the Greek historian Herodotus. And this wasn't just poetic language. Without the Nile River, Egypt would have been nothing but an endless desert, a barren wasteland where no great pyramids would ever rise, where no pharaohs would ever rule. The entire Egyptian civilization owed its existence to this one magnificent river that snaked through the desert like a blue ribbon of life itself. Every single year, like clockwork, the Nile would flood. This wasn't a disaster, it was a blessing. The floods came between June and September, and when the waters receded, they left behind something precious, rich, dark silt that turned the riverbanks into the most fertile soil imaginable. This silt was like nature's fertilizer, packed with nutrients that made crops grow tall and strong. The ancient Egyptians could plant wheat, barley, flax, and vegetables in this soil, feeding millions of people in a region where rain almost never fell. But here's what makes this even more fascinating. The Egyptians didn't just see the Nile as a water source, they saw it as a god. They called this god Happy, and they imagined him as a large man with a big belly and drooping breasts, representing both male and female fertility. Happy wasn't depicted as a typical strong, muscular god. Instead, he looked well-fed and abundant, symbolizing the richness and plenty that the Nile's floods brought to Egypt year after year. His skin was often painted blue or green in artwork, the colors of water and vegetation. The flooding of the Nile was so important that the Egyptians built their entire calendar around it. They divided their year into 3 seasons, and each season was tied to the river's cycle. First came Akhet, the flooding season, when the Nile overflowed its banks. Then came Peret, the growing season, when farmers planted their crops in the fertile mud. Finally came Shemu, the harvest season, when they gathered their crops before the floods came again. This cycle repeated every single year, reliable as the rising sun, and it shaped every aspect of Egyptian life. When the flood season approached, the Egyptians didn't just sit back and wait. They held elaborate ceremonies to honor Happy and ensure the floods would be good ones, not too weak, which would mean famine, and not too strong, which could destroy villages. These ceremonies were spectacular events that brought entire communities together. Priests, dressed in fine linen robes, would lead processions to the riverbanks. They carried statues of Happy through the streets, while musicians played drums, harps, and flutes. People sang hymns praising the god of the Nile, their voices rising together in hope and prayer. The offerings made to Happy were carefully chosen to please him. People threw precious items into the Nile, jewelry made of gold and silver, amulets carved with protective symbols, small statues of gods and goddesses. They also offered food, the best bread, the finest beer, fresh vegetables, and fruits. Some offerings were symbolic. They would throw papyrus scrolls into the water with prayers written on them, believing the river would carry their words directly to the god. In some ceremonies, They even cast flowers into the current, watching them float downstream as if carrying their hopes for a good harvest. But the Nile meant more than just farming and food. It was also deeply connected to Egyptian beliefs about life after death. The Egyptians believed that when you died, your soul had to travel through the underworld, called the Duat, before reaching the afterlife. And guess what? Water played a huge role in this journey. The soul needed to cross various waterways in the underworld, and ancient texts describe deceased people needing to drink from sacred pools to regain their strength. Water was both a barrier and a path, something that could cleanse you of earthly sins and prepare you for eternal life. One goddess associated with water and moisture was Tefnut, whose name literally meant moisture. She wasn't just a rain goddess, she represented dew, clouds, and the life-giving dampness that allowed things to grow in Egypt's harsh desert climate. In one myth, Tefnut became angry and left Egypt, going far south to Nubia. While she was gone, Egypt suffered terrible drought. The land dried up, crops failed, and people began to starve. The other gods became desperate to bring her back. They sent Thoth, the god of wisdom, to find her and convince her to return. Thoth used clever words and soothing promises, and eventually Tefnut agreed to come home. The moment she returned to Egypt, rain fell, the Nile rose, and life bloomed again. This myth shows how deeply the Egyptians connected water with divine favour and cosmic balance. The goddess Isis also had connections to water, particularly the Nile flood. According to legend, the annual flooding was caused by Isis's tears. The story goes that after her husband Osiris was murdered by his jealous brother Set, Isis wept so profusely that her tears swelled the Nile, causing it to overflow. This myth tied the river's life-giving floods to the power of love, grief, and renewal. Isis wasn't just crying from sadness. Her tears contained the power to resurrect life itself, to turn barren land into flourishing fields. Think about what it must have been like to live in ancient Egypt and watch the Nile flood every year. You would see the water rising slowly, day by day, creeping up the banks and spreading across the fields. You would smell the rich, earthy scent of wet soil. You would hear the rushing sound of water filling irrigation canals, and you would feel relief, knowing that another year of food was secured. This wasn't just a natural event, it was proof that the gods still cared about you, that the cosmic order was holding steady, and that life would continue. The Nile also served as Egypt's main highway. Roads through the desert were difficult and dangerous, but the river provided a smooth, reliable path for travel and trade. Boats made of papyrus reeds or wood floated up and down the Nile constantly, carrying grain, stone blocks for building projects, pottery, tools, and people. Merchants travelled from the Mediterranean Sea in the north all the way down to Nubia in the south, trading Egyptian goods for gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animals. The current of the Nile flowed north toward the sea, but the prevailing winds blew south, which meant boats could sail upstream against the current using sails. This made two-way travel easy and efficient. Nilometers were special structures built to measure the river's water level during flood season. These were basically wells or marked columns connected to the river, and priests would check them daily to see how high the water was rising. The measurements were recorded carefully because they helped predict whether the harvest would be good or bad. If the Nile rose about 16 cubits, roughly 8 meters or 26 feet, it was perfect enough water to flood the fields without destroying villages. If it rose less than 12 cubits, there wouldn't be enough water for crops, and famine could follow. If it rose more than 18 cubits, the flooding could destroy homes and drown livestock. The Nilometer readings were so important that they were reported to the pharaoh himself, and taxes for the year were sometimes adjusted based on these measurements. Water from the Nile was considered inherently sacred and pure. It wasn't just any water, it was divine water that flowed from the realm of the gods. Temple priests would draw water directly from the Nile for use in religious ceremonies, believing it carried the blessing of Hapi and other water deities. This water was used to wash sacred statues, to fill offering bowls, to purify temple spaces, and to bless worshippers. Some temples had their own sacred lakes fed by the Nile through underground channels, ensuring a constant supply of holy water. The relationship between Egyptians and the Nile was personal and intimate. People bathed in the river, washed their clothes in it, and drew drinking water from it every single day. Children played along its banks, splashing in the shallows while their parents worked nearby. Fishermen cast their nets at dawn and dusk, pulling up fish like tilapia and catfish that fed families throughout Egypt. Women filled clay jars with Nile water and carried them home balanced on their heads, a daily task that connected them to the divine source of life. But the Nile also had dangers. Crocodiles lurked in the deeper waters, and they were respected and feared in equal measure. The Egyptians worshipped Sobek, a crocodile-headed god who represented both the protective and dangerous aspects of the Nile. Sobek was honoured with temples and offerings because people believed he could protect them from crocodile attacks, while also ensuring the river remained healthy and full of fish. In some regions, sacred crocodiles were kept in temple pools and fed choice meats, treated like living representatives of the god himself. Hippopotamuses were another Nile danger. These massive animals were aggressive and territorial, and they could easily overturn boats or attack people who got too close. The goddess Taweret, who looked like a pregnant hippopotamus standing upright, was associated with childbirth and protection. Despite the real danger hippos posed, Taweret was seen as a fierce protector of mothers and babies, showing how the Egyptians transformed even frightening aspects of nature into divine guardians. Understanding the Nile's central role in Egyptian life helps us understand why water rituals were so elaborate and important. Water wasn't just H2O, it was the physical manifestation of divine power, the substance that connected the earthly world to the realm of the gods, the medium through which blessings flowed from heaven to earth. Every drop of Nile water carried sacred meaning, every ritual washing was a connection to the divine, and every flood was proof that the gods still watched over Egypt with favour. The ancient Egyptians also understood the Nile's source as mysterious and sacred. They knew the river flowed from the south, from deep in Africa, but they didn't fully understand where its waters originated. This mystery added to the Nile's divine nature. Some believed the Nile sprang from the underworld itself, flowing up from the realm of the dead to nourish the living. Others thought it came from celestial sources, rain falling from the sky goddess Nut. This uncertainty about the Nile's origin made it seem even more magical and God-given. The banks of the Nile were divided into the Black Land and the Red Land. The Black Land was the fertile soil along the river, dark and rich from the annual floods. This was where people lived, farmed, and built their cities. The Red Land was the desert beyond the floodplain, barren and lifeless, the colour of reddish sand. This stark division between life-giving black soil and death-dealing red desert reinforced how completely Egyptian civilization depended on the Nile's waters. Step off the Black Land into the Red Land, and you entered a realm where water was scarce, where survival was difficult, where life struggled. During the dry season, when the Nile was at its lowest, before the floods came, there was always anxiety. What if this year the flood didn't come? What if the gods had abandoned Egypt? What if the cosmic order had broken down? These fears drove the elaborate ceremonies and offerings designed to ensure the flood's return. The relief when the waters finally began to rise was profound and universal. The flood meant survival for another year, and that survival was never taken for granted. The Egyptians developed sophisticated irrigation systems to maximize the benefit of the Nile's floods. They dug canals that directed water from the river to fields that didn't naturally flood. They built dikes and levees to control where water went and how long it stayed on the fields. They created basin irrigation systems where fields were divided into sections that could be flooded and drained in sequence, allowing different crops to be planted at optimal times. All this engineering required careful planning, coordinated labor, and constant maintenance, but it allowed Egypt to support a large population in what would otherwise be desert. The seasonal rhythm of the Nile shaped Egyptian concepts of time and existence. Time wasn't seen as linear progression but as cyclical repetition, the same patterns recurring eternally. The flood came every year, crops grew every year, harvest came every year, the dry season returned every year, and then the flood came again. This cyclical view of time influenced Egyptian religion deeply. The daily journey of the sun god Ra across the sky and through the underworld mirrored the yearly cycle of the Nile. Death and rebirth, destruction and renewal, were natural parts of existence, as reliable as the river's flood. The Nile Valley created a unique civilization precisely because it was so isolated and so dependent on one water source. To the east and west lay deserts that protected Egypt from invasion. To the north lay the Mediterranean Sea. To the south lay cataracts, rocky rapids that made river travel difficult and served as natural barriers. This geographic isolation, combined with the Nile's reliable fertility, allowed Egyptian civilization to develop with remarkable stability and continuity. For thousands of years, the same basic patterns of life continued. The Nile flooded, crops grew, pharaohs ruled, temples honored the gods, and the cycle repeated. When we talk about ancient Egyptian water rituals, we're talking about practices that emerged from this deep, intimate relationship with the Nile. The river wasn't just economically important, it was spiritually central. It was the source of life, the gift of the gods, the proof that the cosmic order remained intact. Every ritual involving water was ultimately a ritual honoring the Nile, even when performed far from the river itself, even when using water from wells or sacred lakes. All water in Egypt ultimately came from the Nile, or from rain that was rare and miraculous. Water was sacred because the Nile was sacred, and the Nile was sacred because without it, Egypt would not exist. Chapter 2. Sacred Lakes and Temple Pools. Have you ever stood at the edge of a pool so large it looked like a lake, so perfectly constructed it seemed impossible for ancient people to have built it? The sacred lakes of ancient Egyptian temples were engineering marvels that served as the heart of religious purification rituals. These weren't simple ponds, they were carefully designed water systems that played a crucial role in maintaining the spiritual purity necessary for temple life. The most famous of these sacred lakes still exists today at Karnak Temple in Luxor. This massive, rectangular pool measures approximately 120 meters long by 77 meters wide. That's about 393 feet by 252 feet, or roughly the size of a modern football field. The lake was dug during the reign of Pharaoh Thutmose III, who ruled Egypt around 1473 to 1458 BCE, more than 3,400 years ago. Think about that for a moment. Ancient workers excavated this enormous basin using copper and bronze tools, moved countless tons of earth and limestone, and lined the entire structure with fitted stone blocks, all without modern machinery. The sacred lake at Karnak was filled with water from the Nile through underground channels. These channels were engineered so cleverly that they maintained a constant water level in the lake, regardless of the Nile's fluctuations. During the flood season, when the Nile rose high, excess water could flow back into the river through overflow channels. During the dry season, the underground connection to the Nile kept the lake supplied with fresh water. This sophisticated hydraulic engineering demonstrated the Egyptians' deep understanding of water dynamics and their ability to manipulate natural systems for religious purposes. But why did temples need such enormous pools of water? The answer lies in the Egyptian concept of ritual purity. The Egyptians believed that to approach the gods, a person had to be completely pure, not just physically clean, but spiritually cleansed of any contamination from the ordinary world. Priests who served in the temples had the most stringent purity requirements. They couldn't just wash their hands and face like regular people. They had to immerse their entire bodies in sacred water multiple times every single day. The typical day for a priest at Karnak began long before dawn. While the sky was still dark and stars still glimmered above, priests would make their way to the sacred lake. The air would be cool and the water would be chilly, but this was part of the ritual. The priests would descend stone steps that led down into the water from all four sides of the lake. These steps are still visible today, worn smooth by thousands of feet over thousands of years. The priests would wade into the water until it was deep enough to fully submerge themselves. This wasn't a quick dip. The purification process was deliberate and sacred. Priests would immerse themselves completely, ducking their heads under the water and holding their breath. Some sources indicate they did this 4 times, representing the 4 cardinal directions or the 4 elements. As they submerged, they believed they were washing away not just the dust and sweat of the world, but also any spiritual impurity they might have picked up from contact with death, illness, or other polluting influences in daily life. After emerging from the sacred lake, priests would undergo additional purification. They would have their heads and bodies shaved completely. No hair was allowed except eyebrows and eyelashes, though some priests shaved those too. Body hair was seen as impure, a remnant of animal nature that had no place in the sacred temple environment. After shaving, they would wash again with water mixed with natron, a naturally occurring salt compound that had cleansing and disinfecting properties. Finally, they would dress in pure white linen garments that had been washed in the sacred lake and dried in the sun. These garments were worn only within the temple complex and changed frequently to maintain absolute purity. The morning purification in the sacred lake wasn't the only time priests bathed. They were required to wash at least twice during the day and twice during the night, 4 baths minimum every 24 hours. Some high-ranking priests bathed even more frequently, especially before performing important rituals like the daily feeding of the god statue or during major festivals. This constant bathing wasn't just about hygiene, it was about maintaining a state of ritual purity that allowed priests to act as intermediaries between the human world and the divine realm. The sacred lake wasn't just for bathing. It also played a role in the Egyptian creation myth. The Egyptians believed that before the world existed, there was only none, an infinite ocean of dark, chaotic water. From this primordial water, a mound of earth arose, and on this mound, the sun god Ra appeared and began creating the world. The sacred lakes in temples represented this primordial water of creation. When priests bathed in the lake, they were symbolically returning to the moment of creation, dissolving back into the cosmic waters before being reborn as purified beings capable of serving the gods. The sacred lake at Karnak also served practical purposes beyond purification. It was home to sacred geese, which were symbols of the god Amun, the chief deity of Karnak temple. These geese weren't ordinary birds, they were considered semi-divine, and harming them was strictly forbidden. Priests would feed the geese daily, and their presence on the lake was seen as a sign of the god's favour. The honking of the geese at dawn was interpreted as a form of worship, their voices joining the priests' hymns in greeting the rising sun. The lake was also used for ritual navigation. During certain festivals, priests would place model boats carrying statues of gods on the lake and sail them around in ceremonial processions. These model boats represented the solar bark, the mythical boat in which Ra travelled across the sky each day and through the underworld each night. By sailing these boats on the sacred lake, priests were participating in and supporting the cosmic journey of the sun, helping to ensure that Ra would successfully complete his voyage and rise again the next morning. Other major temples throughout Egypt had their own sacred lakes, each built to similar specifications but adapted to local conditions. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera had a sacred lake shaped like a crescent moon, reflecting Hathor's connection to the moon and feminine cycles. The Temple of Mut at Karnak had a horseshoe-shaped sacred lake that was even larger than the main Karnak lake. The Temple of Osiris at Abydos had a sacred lake connected to underground chambers, where mystery rituals were performed, ceremonies so secret that we still don't fully understand what they entailed. Smaller temples had smaller pools or basins for purification if they couldn't accommodate a full sacred lake. These pools might be square or rectangular, lined with stone or brick, and filled from wells or canals connected to the Nile. Even the smallest temple had some facility for ritual bathing because purification was absolutely essential to Egyptian religion. Without clean water for washing, no temple could function, no priests could serve, and no offerings could be made to the gods. The construction of sacred lakes and purification pools represented a significant investment of resources and labor. Workers had to excavate enormous amounts of earth and stone. Engineers had to calculate precise depths and dimensions to ensure the lake would hold water without leaking and maintain a stable water level. Stonemasons had to cut and fit thousands of stone blocks to line the basin and create the descending staircases. The result was a permanent water feature that would serve the temple for centuries or even millennia. The water in sacred lakes was considered so holy that ordinary people were not allowed to touch it. Common citizens who came to the temple to pray or make offerings could not bathe in the sacred lake. That privilege was reserved exclusively for priests and, occasionally, for royalty. The pharaoh, as Egypt's high priest and living god, could bathe in any sacred lake in the kingdom. Queens and princesses who held priestly titles for certain goddesses also had bathing privileges at the temples they served. The sacred lakes remained in use throughout ancient Egyptian history, from the Old Kingdom around 2686 to 2181 BCE, through the Ptolemaic period 332 to 30 BCE, a span of more than 2,500 years. This continuity shows how central water purification rituals were to Egyptian religious practice. Even as dynasties changed, as Egypt was conquered by foreign powers, as new gods were introduced and old gods faded, the sacred lakes remained, their water still washing away impurities, their depths still reflecting the sky, their presence still marking the boundary between the ordinary world and the sacred space of the temple. Today, when visitors walk through the ruins of Karnak Temple and stand at the edge of the sacred lake, they can still see the ancient stone steps descending into the water. The lake is still filled, though now with groundwater rather than Nile water channeled through the ancient system. But the space still feels sacred somehow, as if thousands of years of prayers and purifications have soaked into the very stone. It's not hard to imagine priests emerging from the water at dawn, their wet skin gleaming in the early light, their minds focused on the sacred duties ahead, their bodies purified and ready to serve the gods. The engineering precision of these sacred lakes continues to amaze modern archaeologists and engineers. The stone lining had to be perfectly sealed to prevent leakage. The underground channels had to maintain exactly the right gradient to allow water to flow in from the Nile without flooding the temple during high water periods. Overflow channels had to be positioned precisely to drain excess water when needed. All this required mathematical calculations, surveying skills, and practical engineering knowledge that rivaled anything being done elsewhere in the ancient world. Some sacred lakes had additional features that enhanced their ritual significance. At the Temple of Khonsu at Karnak, the sacred lake had a small island in the middle where a chapel was built. Priests would row to this island to perform special rituals isolated in the middle of the sacred waters. At other temples, the sacred lake was surrounded by covered porticos, where priests could walk while reciting prayers, their footsteps echoing off stone columns as they circled the water. The temperature of the water in sacred lakes varied by season. In summer, the water would be pleasantly cool, a relief from the intense Egyptian heat. In winter, particularly in the early morning hours before dawn, the water could be quite cold, especially in Upper Egypt where desert nights could be chilly. This physical challenge was seen as part of the purification process. The discomfort of cold water was a test of dedication, proof that the priest was willing to suffer for the gods. Sacred lakes required constant maintenance. Algae could grow in the still water, especially during hot months. Leaves and debris would blow in from surrounding areas. The stone lining could crack or shift over time. Temple workers, usually lower-ranking priests or temple servants, had the responsibility of keeping the sacred lake clean. They would skim debris from the surface, scrub algae from the stones, and inspect the structure for damage. Periodically, the lake might be partially or completely drained for deep cleaning and repairs. The water quality in sacred lakes was monitored carefully. If the water became turbid or developed an unpleasant odor, it was seen as a bad omen, potentially indicating that the gods were displeased. Priests might perform additional purification rituals, making offerings to water deities and asking for the water to be cleansed. In practical terms, if the water quality deteriorated seriously, the underground channels from the Nile could be opened wider to flush fresh water through the system. During certain festivals, the sacred lake became the focal point of public ceremonies. While ordinary people couldn't enter the water, they could gather around it and watch as priests performed elaborate rituals. The sight of dozens of white-robed priests emerging from the water at dawn, steam rising from their skin in the cool morning air, must have been spectacular and spiritually moving for observers. These public displays reinforced the priest's sacred status and demonstrated the temple's power and wealth. Only a rich and favored temple could maintain such a magnificent sacred lake. The sacred lakes also had astronomical significance. Many were aligned with celestial phenomena. The sacred lake at Karnak is oriented along an east-west axis that aligns with the sunrise at the equinoxes. Priests bathing in the lake at dawn during these important astronomical moments were symbolically bathing in the first light of the rising sun, connecting the purification of their bodies with the daily rebirth of Ra, the sun god. Some temples had multiple water features beyond the main sacred lake. There might be smaller basins for specific purification purposes, fountain-like structures where water was poured for offerings, and underground chambers with water channels for mystery rituals. The temple of Seti I at Abydos has an underground chamber called the Osirion that features a massive sunken hall surrounded by a channel of water. This mysterious structure may have been used for initiation rituals, where candidates were symbolically drowned and reborn, reenacting the death and resurrection of Osiris. The symbolic meaning of sacred lakes extended beyond purification to encompass creation, renewal, and eternal life. Water was the source from which all existence emerged and to which all existence would eventually return. By regularly immersing themselves in sacred water, priests were repeatedly experiencing death and rebirth, dissolution and reconstitution. This daily practice prepared them for the ultimate transition, physical death and rebirth in the afterlife. The careful maintenance and operation of sacred lakes demonstrates how seriously the Egyptians took the connection between physical purity and spiritual fitness. The temple wasn't just a building where rituals happened, it was a carefully constructed and maintained sacred environment where every element, from the water in the lakes to the incense in the censers, worked together to create a space where humans and gods could interact. The sacred lake was the purifying threshold that allowed humans to cross from the ordinary world into the divine realm of the temple's inner sanctum. Chapter 3. The daily ritual of the priests. What was it actually like to be a priest in ancient Egypt? Most people imagine priests as spiritual advisors or teachers, but Egyptian priests were more like sacred servants. Their main job was to physically care for the god statue that lived in the temple. This might sound strange to modern ears, but the Egyptians truly believed that the spirit of a god could inhabit a statue, and that statue needed to be fed, washed, dressed, and honoured every single day. The daily ritual of the priests revolved around this care, and water played a starring role. The day began hours before sunrise. While ordinary Egyptians were still sleeping on their rooftops or in their homes, catching the last cool hours before the desert sun rose, priests were already awake and preparing for their duties. The first task was always purification. We've talked about bathing in the sacred lake, but that was just the beginning. After their bath, priests would proceed to a special purification chamber built into the temple complex. This chamber had channels of flowing water where priests could rinse their mouths and hands again. They would use natron to scrub their teeth and gums until they were perfectly clean, no trace of food, no hint of morning breath could remain. Some priests used a chewing stick, a small twig with one end frayed into fibres, which they rubbed against their teeth to clean them. After teeth cleaning, they would rinse their mouths with water, spitting it into a drainage channel that carried the water away from the sacred precinct. After oral purification came incense. Priests would burn incense made from frankincense and myrrh, imported from lands far to the south and east, expensive substances that represented purity and divine favour. They would waft the smoke over their bodies and breathe it in, believing it purified them from the inside out. The combination of water bathing, natron scrubbing, and incense fumigation created a multi-layered purification that addressed physical, spiritual, and atmospheric cleanliness. Only after completing these purification rituals could a priest enter the inner sanctuary of the temple where the god's statue resided. This wasn't a large space. Most sanctuaries were relatively small, intimate rooms at the heart of the temple complex, surrounded by halls, courts, and outer chambers that grew progressively less sacred as you moved away from the centre. The sanctuary was dark, illuminated only by small oil lamps and the torches carried by priests. The walls were covered with hieroglyphic inscriptions and painted scenes showing the pharaoh offering to the gods. The colours still bright, even in dim light. The god statue sat in a shrine, a special cabinet or small chamber that protected it from view. This shrine had double doors sealed with a clay seal that bore the mark of the high priest. Breaking the seal was a solemn moment. The priest would carefully break the clay, open the doors, and come face to face with the god. The statue might be made of wood covered in gold, or carved from stone, and it would be dressed in elaborate clothing from previous days' rituals. Its face would be painted, its body adorned with jewellery. The morning ritual followed a precise sequence that varied slightly from temple to temple, but followed the same basic pattern. First, the priest would prostrate himself before the god, lying face down on the floor in a gesture of ultimate humility and respect. Then he would stand and begin to sing or chant hymns, his voice echoing in the small space. These hymns greeted the god, welcomed him to the new day, and asked for his blessing. Next came the most important part, washing the statue. The priest would pour water over the statue from special libation vases. These vessels were often made of gold, silver, or precious stone, and they were used only for this purpose. The water used was not ordinary water. It came from the sacred lake, drawn at dawn and carried in these special containers. As the priest poured the water over the statue, he believed he was physically washing the god, helping him prepare for the day ahead. After washing with water, the priest would dry the statue with fine linen cloths that had been specially prepared for this purpose. Then came anointing with oils. The priest would apply sacred oils to the statue: cedar oil, myrrh oil, lotus oil, each one with specific properties and meanings. These oils not only preserved the statue but also honored the god with precious substances that smelled divine. The priest would anoint the statue's face, arms, torso, and legs, just as you might apply lotion to your own body. Then came dressing. The old linen garments from the previous day would be removed and replaced with fresh ones. The priest would wrap the statue in new linen, sometimes in multiple layers, and tie the fabric with special knots. Over the linen might go more elaborate garments, a pleated tunic, a decorative collar made of beads and amulets, a headdress appropriate to the specific god. If the statue was female, like Hathor or Isis, the clothing and jewellery would be more ornate, including elaborate wigs and crowns. After dressing came adornment. The priest would place jewellery on the statue, necklaces, bracelets, rings, earrings if the statue's ears were pierced. Some gods wore multiple necklaces layered on their chests, including the elaborate broad collar typical of Egyptian formal dress. The priest might apply cosmetics to the statue's face, black coal around the eyes to make them stand out, red ochre on the lips and cheeks for colour, sometimes even gold leaf on the skin for radiance. Finally came the food offerings. Tables laden with food and drink would be brought into the sanctuary. The offerings included fresh bread baked that morning, beer brewed in the temple complex, wine from temple vineyards, roasted meat from sacrificed animals, fresh fruits like figs and dates, vegetables, milk, honey, and cakes sweetened with honey and flavoured with spices. The priest would present each offering to the god, holding the item up while reciting prayers and invitations for the god to enjoy the food. Here's something fascinating. The Egyptians believed that the god didn't actually consume the physical food. Instead, the god consumed the life force or spiritual essence of the food, leaving the physical substance intact. After the god had eaten, the food would be removed from the sanctuary and distributed to the priests and temple workers as payment for their service. This meant that serving in a temple came with good benefits. You got to eat food that had been blessed by the gods, food that was often higher quality than what ordinary people could afford. Water offerings were particularly important. The priest would pour libations of water before the god, sometimes from special libation tables carved with channels that allowed the water to flow in patterns across the surface before draining away. These libations were accompanied by prayers asking the god to accept the offering and grant blessings in return. Some libation formulas specifically mentioned cool water or pure water, emphasizing the refreshing and cleansing properties of the water being offered. At midday, a simpler ceremony was performed. The priest would return to the sanctuary to burn incense and pour water libations before the god. This noon ritual was shorter, but still important, a way of checking in with the god during the middle of the day and ensuring his continued comfort. Some texts describe this midday ritual as purification by water and incense, a lighter version of the elaborate morning ceremony. In the evening, as the sun set and darkness approached, another ritual was performed. This evening ceremony was similar to the morning one, but in reverse rather than awakening and preparing the god for the day. The priest was preparing the god for sleep. The statue would be offered food and drink one last time. The sanctuary would be cleaned and purified with water and incense, and then the god would be put to bed. The shrine doors would be closed and sealed with a new clay seal to remain unopened until the next morning. Between the major rituals, priests had other water-related duties. They cleaned the temple floors by sprinkling water and then sweeping, a process that dampened dust and left the stone floors spotless. They washed sacred vessels and tools after each use, using water from the sacred lake and special cleaning compounds. They maintained the sacred lake itself, removing debris and occasionally draining and cleaning the entire basin to prevent algae growth and ensure the water remained pure. Different ranks of priests had different responsibilities regarding these rituals. The high priest, called the first prophet, was technically the only person authorized to perform the daily ritual for the main god of the temple. though in practice he might delegate this to other senior priests. The high priest had to maintain the highest level of ritual purity, which meant even more frequent bathing and more stringent restrictions on what he could eat, who he could associate with, and where he could go. Lower-ranking priests, called wab priests, wab means pure, performed supporting roles. They drew water from the sacred lake, carried it to where it was needed, prepared the food offerings, maintained the temple lamps, and performed purification rituals for temple visitors. Even these supporting roles required ritual purity, so wab priests also bathed in the sacred lake multiple times per day, though perhaps not as frequently as higher-ranking priests. Some priests specialized in specific types of rituals. Lector priests were experts in reading hieroglyphic texts and reciting the complex prayers and spells needed for ceremonies. They had to know hundreds or even thousands of ritual texts by heart and pronounce them perfectly. A mispronounced word could ruin a ritual's effectiveness. Sem priests specialized in funeral rituals and embalming, roles that brought them into contact with death and required even more elaborate purification afterwards. Women also served as priests in ancient Egypt, particularly in temples dedicated to goddesses. Female priests, called Hemet Netja, God's wife, or Hemetka, priest, performed many of the same water-based purification rituals as their male counterparts. They bathed in sacred pools, poured libations, and participated in temple ceremonies. High-ranking royal women sometimes held the title God's wife of Amun, one of the most powerful religious positions in Egypt, with their own temples, estates, and staffs of attendant priests. The priestesses of Hathor, goddess of love, beauty, music, and joy, had special rituals involving water and celebration. The cult of Hathor included singing, dancing, and sacred drunkenness. Yes, getting ritually drunk was actually part of worshipping Hathor. Priestesses would perform dances while shaking sacred rattles called sistrums, the rattling sound believed to please the goddess and drive away evil spirits. After their performances, they would purify themselves with water and natron, washing away the sweat and exhaustion before putting on fresh garments and continuing their temple service. One unique aspect of priestly purification involved water temperature. Most sacred bathing happened in unheated water, which meant early morning dips in the sacred lake could be quite cold, especially during winter months when desert nights dropped temperatures significantly. This cold water immersion was seen as spiritually beneficial. The shock of cold water woke you up completely, sharpened your focus, and demonstrated your dedication to serving the gods, even at personal discomfort. Priests were expected to avoid certain activities between purifications. They couldn't have sexual contact. Most priests served in rotating shifts, perhaps 1 month in service and 3 months off, during which they could live normal lives. But during their temple service they had to abstain. They couldn't eat certain foods, particularly pork and some types of fish, which were considered impure. They couldn't wear wool or leather, only linen made from flax plants. These restrictions meant that maintaining ritual purity wasn't just about washing with water. It was about living in a completely different way while in service to the gods. The daily rituals performed by priests might seem repetitive to us, but to the ancient Egyptians they were essential for maintaining Ma'at, the concept of cosmic order, balance, truth, and justice that kept the universe functioning properly. Every morning ritual successfully completed meant the sun would rise, the Nile would continue to flow, crops would grow, and chaos would be held at bay for another day. The priests weren't just going through empty motions, they believed they were literally helping to hold the world together, and the water that purified them was a sacred tool that allowed them to perform this cosmic work. The rhythm of priestly life, structured around water rituals and divine service, created a lifestyle completely different from that of ordinary Egyptians. While farmers tended crops, merchants conducted business, and craftsmen made goods. Priests lived in a world apart, a world defined by purity, prayer, and proximity to the divine. The constant cycle of purification, bathing, scrubbing, rinsing, and bathing again created a heightened awareness of the boundary between sacred and profane, clean and unclean, divine and human. Some priests spent their entire adult lives in temple service, rotating between active service and rest periods, but never fully returning to ordinary life. These career priests developed a deep spiritual connection to the water rituals they performed daily. The act of descending into the sacred lake at dawn became a meditation, a moving prayer, a physical expression of devotion. The sensation of water on skin, the smell of natron and incense, the sight of the sun rising over the lake's surface. All these sensory elements combined to create powerful religious experiences that reinforced the priest's commitment to their sacred duties. Chapter 4. Natron, Salt, and Sacred Substances. What did ancient Egyptian priests actually wash with? When we talk about purification and bathing in ancient Egypt, we often focus on water alone. But there was another substance that played an equally crucial role in ritual cleansing: natron. This naturally occurring mineral was so important to Egyptian culture that it was considered a gift from the gods themselves, a substance with the power to purify both the living and the dead. Natron is a mixture of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, baking soda, sodium chloride, table salt, and sodium sulfate. It forms naturally in dry lake beds, in desert regions where evaporation leaves behind mineral deposits. The ancient Egyptians collected natron primarily from Wadi Natron, a valley in the western desert about 70 kilometers northwest of Cairo. This valley had several shallow lakes that would partially dry up each year, leaving behind thick crusts of white and yellow crystals that could be harvested like crops. The Egyptians recognized natron's multiple useful properties. First and most obviously, it was an excellent cleansing agent. When mixed with water, natron creates an alkaline solution that cuts through oils and dirt effectively. Essentially, it's a type of soap. Ancient Egyptians didn't have the elaborate soaps and detergents we use today, but natron, mixed with water or combined with oils, could clean skin, hair, clothes, and surfaces quite effectively. But natron wasn't just valued for physical cleaning. The Egyptians believed it had spiritual cleansing properties as well. Temple inscriptions and religious texts frequently mention washing with natron as a way to achieve ritual purity. The substance was seen as inherently holy, a divine gift that could remove not just physical dirt, but also spiritual contamination. Natron was mentioned in the Book of the Dead, the collection of spells meant to guide the deceased through the afterlife, with specific passages describing the deceased being purified with natron before entering the presence of the gods. In the daily temple rituals we discussed earlier, priests didn't wash with plain water alone. They used water and natron together in a multi-step process. After immersing themselves in the sacred lake, priests would scrub their bodies with natron, paying special attention to areas that might harbour impurities: armpits, groin, feet, and behind the ears. The natron would be ground into a fine powder and mixed with a small amount of water to form a paste, or sometimes used as a dry powder that was rubbed directly onto wet skin. This natron scrubbing wasn't gentle. The abrasive quality of the crystals meant it was physically rough, almost like using a harsh exfoliating scrub. The scrubbing would remove dead skin cells, leaving the skin feeling raw and tingling. But this physical sensation was seen as proof that the purification was working. You could feel the natron cleansing you. After scrubbing with natron, priests would rinse thoroughly in clean water to remove all traces of the mineral and any loosened dirt. Natron was also used for washing the mouth, a particularly important purification for priests who would be reciting prayers and offering food to the gods. The priest would take a small amount of powdered natron and rub it on his teeth and gums, then swish water around his mouth to rinse. This mouthwashing had both practical and spiritual benefits. Practically, natron's mild abrasiveness and alkaline nature would clean teeth and freshen breath. Ancient Egyptians did care about dental hygiene. Spiritually, it purified the mouth so that the words spoken would be pure and worthy of being heard by the gods. The most famous use of natron, of course, was in mummification. When someone died, embalmers would use natron to preserve the body for the afterlife. The process was lengthy and elaborate. First, internal organs except the heart would be removed and stored in special jars. Then the body would be completely covered in natron, both packed inside the body cavity and piled around the outside and left for about 40 days. During this time, the natron would absorb all moisture from the body, essentially turning it into dried flesh that wouldn't decay. This connection between natron and mummification deepened its association with spiritual transformation. Natron wasn't just preserving a dead body, it was preparing a person for eternal life. It was transforming mortal remains into something that could last forever, something worthy of reuniting with the soul in the afterlife. Because natron performed this miraculous preservation, it was seen as having inherent divine power. Given natron's importance in preparing the dead for eternal life, its use in daily purification rituals takes on extra significance. When priests washed with natron, they were symbolically undergoing a transformation similar to what the dead experienced. They were shedding their mortal impurities and becoming more like the gods they served. The natron bath was a daily rebirth, a renewal of their sacred status. Different types and grades of natron existed for different purposes. The purest white natron was reserved for the highest religious purposes, purifying the most sacred spaces, washing the most important statues, and preparing royal mummies. Yellow natron, which contained more impurities and sulfur compounds, might be used for lower-grade purifications or for cleaning temple floors and utensils. Sometimes, natron was refined and purified through additional processing, dissolved in water, and then recrystallized to remove impurities. The Egyptians also used incense in conjunction with water and natron for purification. Common incenses included frankincense and myrrh, both imported from the land of Punt, probably modern-day Somalia or Yemen, as well as locally made incenses from aromatic woods, resins, and flowers. During purification rituals, priests would burn incense and waft the smoke over themselves, believing the aromatic smoke cleansed them in a different way than water and natron, purifying the air around them and creating an atmosphere worthy of the gods. A complete purification ritual might involve multiple substances used in sequence. First, immersion in the sacred lake for overall bodily cleansing. Second, natron scrubbing for deeper physical and spiritual cleaning. Third, anointing with oils for protection and blessing. Fourth, fumigation with incense smoke for atmospheric purification. Fifth and finally, dressing in freshly washed linen garments. This multi-step process addressed every aspect of purification, body, spirit, and environment. Sacred oils played a role in purification rituals alongside water and natron. After the harsh natron scrubbing left skin raw and clean, applying oils served multiple purposes. Practically, it soothed and moisturized skin that had been stripped of natural oils by the natron. Spiritually, the oils were seen as protective, creating a barrier between the purified priest and the polluting influences of the world. Symbolically, oil represented divine favor. Being anointed with oil meant being chosen and blessed by the gods. Different oils had different properties and were used for different purposes. Cedar oil was imported from Lebanon and was considered particularly sacred, associated with eternity and resurrection. Myrrh oil had purifying properties and a resinous, slightly bitter scent. Lotus oil, made from the sacred blue lotus flowers that grew in the Nile, had a sweet floral scent and was associated with rebirth and the sun. Moringa oil, pressed from the seeds of the moringa tree, was valued for its purity and mild scent. The combination of water, natron, and oils in purification rituals wasn't arbitrary. It reflected Egyptian understanding of chemistry and preservation. Water cleaned, natron alkalized and disinfected, and oils protected and sealed. Together, these substances created a comprehensive cleansing system that was remarkably effective for its time. Archaeological studies of Egyptian mummies and preserved organic materials have shown that this combination really did work. It prevented bacterial growth, inhibited decay, and preserved materials for thousands of years. Ordinary Egyptians used natron too, though perhaps not as extensively as priests. Natron was commonly used for washing clothes. Linen garments would be soaked in water with dissolved natron, which helped break down dirt and body oils. It was used for cleaning cooking vessels and food storage containers. Some people used it as a tooth powder for dental hygiene. Women sometimes used natron in beauty treatments, mixing it with oils to make cleansing pastes for their skin. However, pure natron could be harsh on skin if overused, and the Egyptians knew this. They were careful about how much they used and always rinsed thoroughly afterward. For daily personal washing, most people probably used water alone or water with small amounts of natron. The extensive natron scrubbing we associate with priestly purification was specifically a religious practice, not necessarily something done by everyone every day. The Egyptians also used other natural substances in their water for different effects. Clay, particularly a fine, light-coloured clay similar to what we call fuller's earth, was used as a cleansing agent. Clay has the ability to absorb oils and impurities, making it useful for washing hair and skin. Mixed with water to form a paste, clay could be applied to the body, allowed to dry, and then rinsed off, taking dirt and excess oil with it. Certain plants were added to washing water for their cleansing or aromatic properties. Soapwort, a plant that produces a natural lathering substance when crushed in water, grew in Egypt and may have been used for washing. Henna, famous for dyeing hair and skin, also has cleansing properties and was used in bath preparations. Desert plants with high saponin content, natural soap-like compounds, were collected and used for washing. The sacred aspect of these cleansing substances extended beyond just their practical use. Natron, in particular, was offered to gods just like food and drink. Small cones or packets of natron would be placed on offering tables in temples, symbolic gifts to the gods of the same substance that made humans pure enough to approach them. This circular logic, using natron to purify yourself so you could offer natron to the gods, demonstrates how deeply interconnected all aspects of Egyptian religious practice were. The market value of natron varied depending on quality and quantity. The finest natron for religious purposes was expensive, controlled by temples and the state. Common natron for laundry and household use was cheaper and more widely available. There were natron merchants in Egyptian markets, selling the substance by weight. The state controlled the main natron deposits in Wadi Natron, collecting taxes on natron extraction and trade, because natron was so economically important. For travellers in the desert, natron deposits served as landmarks and resources. Desert travellers could scoop up natron from dry lake beds for free, using it to clean themselves and their clothes during long journeys. Caravans passing through areas with natron deposits would often stop to collect the substance, both for personal use and for trade in cities where it commanded good prices. The religious texts that priests recited during purification rituals specifically mentioned these sacred substances. From the pyramid texts, some of the oldest religious writings in the world, "Cleansed is he who is cleansed by Horus. Cleansed is he who is cleansed by Seth. Cleansed is this king by Natron." The symmetry of this formula, mentioning both Horus and Seth, The divine brothers who represented order and chaos emphasizes that purification through Natron transcended ordinary conflicts and brought one into a purified state beyond earthly divisions. Understanding Natron and the other substances used in Egyptian purification rituals helps us see that water alone wasn't enough for the Egyptians. True purification required multiple elements working together: water to wash, natron to alkalize and disinfect, oils to protect, and incense to sanctify the air. This holistic approach to cleanliness addressed every sensory aspect of purification. The feel of water on skin, the sting of natron, the smoothness of oil, the scent of incense, and the crisp freshness of clean linen. When all these elements came together, the result was a complete transformation from ordinary mortal to purified servant of the gods. The chemistry of natron fascinated ancient Egyptians, even if they didn't understand it in modern scientific terms. They noticed that natron reacted with oils to create a slippery, cleansing substance, what we would recognize as saponification, the chemical reaction that creates soap. They observed that natron could neutralize acids and remove stains that water alone couldn't touch. They discovered that natron could be mixed with specific oils and resins to create different types of cleansers for different purposes: stronger mixtures for cleaning floors and vessels, gentler mixtures for washing delicate fabrics or sensitive skin. The spiritual power attributed to natron wasn't simply superstition, it was based on observable results. Bodies preserved with natron lasted for millennia. Surfaces cleaned with natron stayed cleaner longer. People washed with natron felt physically refreshed and revitalized. These tangible benefits reinforced the belief that natron was a divine substance with inherent magical properties. The line between practical chemistry and spiritual magic was blurred in Egyptian thought. Effective practical results were seen as proof of divine power at work. Natron mining from Wadi Natron was a significant industry that employed many people and generated substantial revenue for temples and the state. Workers would travel to the valley during the dry season when the lake beds were fully exposed and the natron crusts were thickest. They would use simple tools, wooden scrapers, baskets, and bags to collect the natron crystals. The collected natron would be sorted by quality, with the purest white crystals separated from yellower, less pure material. Donkey caravans would transport the natron back to cities and temple complexes where it was stored in special warehouses. The annual natron harvest had ritual significance similar to the grain harvest. Prayers would be offered before harvesting began, asking the gods to bless the workers and provide abundant natron for the coming year. The first natron collected each season would be offered at temples before any was used for practical purposes. This ritual acknowledgement that natron was a divine gift, not just a natural resource to be exploited, characterized the Egyptian approach to all natural materials they used. Different regions of Egypt developed slightly different purification practices based on local resources and traditions. In areas far from Wadi Natron, where natron was expensive to transport, priests might use locally available substitutes, certain types of alkaline clay or ash from specific plants that had some of the same cleansing properties as natron. These substitutes were never considered as effective or spiritually powerful as true natron from Wadi Natron, but they allowed smaller temples with limited budgets to maintain purification practices. The importance of natron in Egyptian religion continued even after Egypt became part of the Roman Empire. Christian Copts, the native Christians of Egypt, maintained some purification practices involving natron, though adapted to Christian theology. Islamic Egypt also preserved some traditional uses of natron for cleaning and personal hygiene, though the religious significance faded. Even today, some traditional Egyptian practices involving salt and alkaline cleansers can be traced back to ancient natron use. The legacy of Egyptian natron use extended beyond Egypt's borders. Greeks and Romans who visited Egypt learned about natron and imported it for their own uses. The word natron itself entered Greek and Latin and eventually spread to other European languages. The chemical symbol for sodium Na comes from natron, reflecting the substance's historical importance. Medieval European alchemists studied ancient Egyptian texts about natron and tried to understand its properties, laying groundwork for modern chemistry. Chapter 5: Water in Death and the Afterlife. Why did the ancient Egyptians care so much about water when preparing for death? The answer reveals one of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian beliefs. They saw death not as an ending, but as a transformation, a journey from one world to another. And like any journey, this passage required preparation, provisions, and ritual cleansing. Water played a crucial role at every stage of this journey, from the moment of death through the elaborate rituals that followed. When someone died in ancient Egypt, one of the first steps in preparing the body for burial involved washing. This wasn't just practical hygiene, it was a sacred ritual that would be followed by the opening of the mouth ceremony. But even before that complex rite, the body needed to be purified with water. Family members or professional embalmers would wash the deceased carefully and thoroughly, cleaning away the dirt and sweat of life, preparing the body to enter a sacred state. This initial washing was done with water from the Nile, the same sacred river that had sustained the person throughout their life. The water was often mixed with natron, as we discussed in the previous chapter, though initially water alone was used for the first cleansing. The act of washing the dead mirrored the daily washing rituals of priests. Both were about transformation from one state to another, from impure to pure, from profane to sacred. After the initial washing came the famous Egyptian practice of mummification, which we touched on earlier but deserves deeper exploration for its connection to water and purification. The mummification process took 70 days to complete and involved multiple stages where water played important roles. After the internal organs were removed, except the heart, which was left in place because the Egyptians believed it was the seat of intelligence and personality, the body would be washed again, inside and out, with palm wine and water from the Nile. This second washing served several purposes. The wine acted as a mild disinfectant due to its alcohol content. The water cleansed the body of blood and fluids released during the evisceration process. Together, they prepared the body for the long drying period with natron. The washing was performed with care and reverence, not rushed or treated as unpleasant work. The embalmers, who were priests as well as craftsmen, recited prayers as they worked, blessing each part of the body as they cleaned it. During the 40 days, when the body was covered in natron, no water touched it. The entire point was to remove all moisture. But after the natron treatment, when the body was dried and preserved, water came back into the process. The natron-covered body would be carefully brushed clean, removing all traces of the drying agent. Then the body would be washed one final time with water infused with aromatic substances, myrrh, frankincense, and other precious resins dissolved or steeped in the water, creating a fragrant purification bath. This final washing before wrapping had deep symbolic meaning. It represented rebirth, similar to how a baby is born wet from the waters of the womb. The deceased was being reborn into the afterlife, emerging clean and new from the transformative waters. After this washing, the body would be anointed with oils and resins, wrapped in layers of linen bandages, and placed in a coffin. But even after the body was fully prepared, water rituals weren't finished. The opening of the mouth ceremony, performed on the day of burial or shortly before, involved water libations. This complex ritual had many parts, but one crucial element involved sprinkling water on the mummy or on the coffin. The priest performing the ceremony would use a special instrument shaped like an adze, a woodworking tool, to symbolically touch the mouth, eyes, ears, and nose of the mummy, while simultaneously pouring water and reciting spells that would restore these senses to the deceased. The logic behind this ritual was that mummification, while preserving the body, rendered it inert. The mouth couldn't speak, the eyes couldn't see, the ears couldn't hear. The opening of the mouth ceremony reversed this, using water and sacred implements to symbolically reanimate these functions so the deceased could use them in the afterlife. The water poured during this ceremony was seen as having the power to restore life, not biological life, but the spiritual capacity to function in the realm of the dead. The Egyptian Book of the Dead contains numerous spells related to water in the afterlife. These spells weren't a single book, but rather a collection of texts that could be customized for each deceased person, written on papyrus and placed in the tomb. Many of these spells deal with ensuring the deceased would have access to water in the afterlife, which tells us how worried the Egyptians were about this basic need. Spell 62, titled "For Drinking Water in the Realm of the Dead," is particularly revealing. It says, "My mouth is opened by Ptah, and the bonds on my mouth are loosened by the god of my town. Thoth comes fully equipped with spells, and the bonds on my mouth are loosened by him. The hand of Atum came with an incantation. It is the hand of Atum, the glorious of prestige. See, I have driven away the god whose name is hidden, when the sky bows down to the south and the north, and when the west to the east is in praise of him. May water be given to me. May I see the great God in the sacred shrine on the day of the counting of souls." This spell shows multiple anxieties: fear that the mouth might remain sealed and unable to drink, concern that water might not be available, and a plea to see the gods in their sacred spaces. Water here represents not just physical refreshment, but spiritual access, the ability to fully participate in the afterlife. Other spells specifically mention different types of water available in the afterlife. There was the water of life, a special pure water that restored and sustained the dead. There was water from the sacred lakes that existed in the underworld, parallel to the sacred temple lakes in the world of the living. There was even mention of celestial water, the dew that formed in the field of reeds, the Egyptian equivalent of heaven, where the blessed dead would live eternally. Tombs were often equipped with actual water or representations of water to help the deceased in the afterlife. Wealthy tombs contained stone or clay jars filled with real water, placed in the burial chamber so the dead person would have something to drink immediately upon awakening in the next world. As these jars wouldn't last forever, they were supplemented with painted images of water jars on tomb walls and with hieroglyphic texts describing endless supplies of water. Some tombs included small models of pools or lakes, limestone or faience, glazed ceramic models, shaped like rectangular pools, sometimes filled with blue-green glaze to represent water. These model pools weren't just decorative, they were magical objects that the deceased could activate through spells to provide real water in the spiritual realm. The logic was sympathetic magic. The model represented a real pool, and through the proper spells, the representation could be made functionally real in the afterlife. Offering tables placed in tombs always included channels carved into their surfaces for liquid offerings. Living family members would visit the tomb periodically and pour water, beer, or wine onto these offering tables. The liquid would flow through the carved channels and drain away, but the spiritual essence of the offering would nourish the deceased. These libations were taken very seriously. Neglecting to provide water offerings for your dead ancestors was considered a serious failing of family duty. The goddess Khiebhet, daughter of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification, had a specific role related to water in the afterlife. She was called the Celestial Refresher and was responsible for bringing water to the souls of the dead, particularly in the Hall of Truth where the deceased's heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at to determine their worthiness. The journey through the underworld was thirsty work, and Khiebhet provided cooling water to souls who needed refreshment. Other deities associated with water also appeared in funerary contexts. Nut, the sky goddess who was often shown arched over the earth, was called the Mother of All and the Lady of the Sycamore. In tomb paintings, she's sometimes shown in her form as a sycamore tree goddess, pouring water from a jar for the deceased to drink. This image of the tree goddess offering water was common in New Kingdom tombs and represented the hope that the deceased would be refreshed and welcomed in the afterlife. The field of reeds, where the blessed dead hoped to spend eternity, was described as a lush paradise with abundant water. It was modelled after the perfect Egyptian landscape, the Nile in flood. Fields green with growing crops, palm trees heavy with dates, cool water available everywhere. Texts describe deceased people bathing in the sacred waters of the field of reeds, just as they had bathed in the Nile during life, but without any risk of crocodiles or disease. Interestingly, there were also fears about negative water in the afterlife. The underworld contained lakes of fire and pools of poisonous water that the deceased had to avoid or overcome. Spell 174 from the Book of the Dead was for not allowing a man to go to the place of execution, and it mentions hostile waters that could trap or destroy the unwary soul. The deceased needed knowledge of the proper paths and proper spells to navigate safely through the underworld's dangerous waters. The weighing of the heart ceremony, perhaps the most famous scene from Egyptian funerary beliefs, had water elements too. In many depictions of this scene, a pool or lake appears beneath the scales where the heart is weighed. This is the lake of fire, described in texts as a place where those who failed the judgment would be destroyed, but for those who passed the test, proving their hearts were not heavy with sin, the water represented purification and entry into eternal life. Some wealthy Egyptians were buried in stone sarcophagi carved with representations of water. The inside of the sarcophagus might be painted blue like the sky or like water, and hieroglyphic texts might describe the sarcophagus itself as a sacred lake or as the primordial ocean of Nun from which all creation emerged. Being placed in such a sarcophagus was symbolically like being submerged in the waters of creation, ready to be reborn in the afterlife. The canopic jars that held the removed internal organs during mummification were sometimes placed in water or near water representations in the tomb. These jars had lids shaped like the four sons of Horus, human-headed Imseti, baboon-headed Hapi, jackal-headed Duamutef, and falcon-headed Quebesanuef. Each protected one set of organs, and their placement near water symbols emphasized purification and protection. Mummification workshops were usually located near water sources, both for practical reasons, the process required washing, and for religious reasons, proximity to the purifying Nile. In some cases, mummification workshops were built on the west bank of the Nile, the side where the sun set, which was symbolically associated with death and the afterlife. The mummies would be prepared within sight and sound of the river, blessed by the presence of sacred water even during the preservation process. The ritual of mourning also involved water. Professional mourners, usually women, would attend funerals and express grief through specific behaviours: crying, wailing, throwing dust on their heads, and tearing their clothes. But they also poured water on the ground as an offering to the deceased. These water offerings were tears made manifest, grief physically expressed through the sacred substance that gave life. The water soaking into the ground was believed to reach the deceased in the underworld, bringing them comfort and sustenance. Living descendants had an ongoing obligation to provide water offerings for their dead ancestors. This wasn't just a one-time funerary ritual, but a continuous practice that could last generations. Families would visit tombs on feast days and pour water, beer, and wine onto offering tables or directly onto the ground near the tomb entrance. These offerings sustained the dead in the afterlife and maintained a connection between the living and their ancestors. For those who couldn't afford expensive mummification and elaborate tombs, simpler water rituals were still performed. The body might be wrapped in reeds and buried in the desert sand, but it would still be washed with Nile water first. Family members would still pour water libations on the grave. The wealthy had more elaborate versions of these rituals, but the fundamental practices involving water purification and water offerings extended across all social classes. Understanding the role of water in Egyptian funerary practices shows us that the Egyptians saw death as a transition that required the same sorts of ritual purifications as any major life change. Just as a priest bathed before entering a temple, just as a baby was washed after birth, the dead were washed before entering the afterlife. Water was the bridge between states of being, the transformative substance that allowed one to cross from one world to another while maintaining purity and divine favor. The extensive water rituals surrounding death also reveal Egyptian anxieties about the afterlife. Despite their confidence in elaborate preparations and magical spells, there was underlying fear that the dead might suffer thirst, might be unable to drink, might be trapped in a dry and desolate part of the underworld. The repeated emphasis on water spells, water offerings, and water representations suggests this was a persistent worry that required multiple layers of protection and provision. The connection between water and rebirth in funerary contexts drew on the same symbolism we see in daily temple rituals. Water washes away the old and prepares for the new. Water dissolves boundaries and enables transformation. Water is the medium of change itself. When the deceased was washed, when water was poured during the opening of the mouth ceremony, when libations flowed across offering tables, each act was affirming the possibility of renewal, the hope that death was not an end but a beginning. Chapter 6. The annual celebration of the Nile flood. What was it like when an entire civilization threw a party for a river? The annual flooding of the Nile wasn't just a natural event, it was the most important festival on the Egyptian calendar, a time when everyone from the pharaoh down to the humblest farmer participated in celebrating the life-giving waters that made Egypt possible. This celebration, called Wepet Renpet, the opening of the year, or sometimes Wafa el Nil, the fidelity of the Nile, combined religious devotion, community celebration, and practical relief that another year of prosperity was beginning. The flood season began around mid-July each year, though the exact timing varied. The Egyptians knew it was coming when they observed the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, which they called Sopdet or Sothis. This means the first day of the year, when Sirius became visible on the eastern horizon just before the sunrise. This celestial event coincided with the beginning of the Nile's flood season so consistently that the Egyptians based their entire calendar on it. The appearance of Sirius was like nature's announcement that the floods were coming, and preparations for the festival would immediately begin. In the weeks before the flood arrived, temples throughout Egypt prepared for the ceremonies honoring Hapi, the god of the Nile flood. Priests crafted special statues and sacred objects, musicians rehearsed hymns, and bakers prepared the thousands of loaves of bread that would be needed for offerings. The pharaoh himself was involved in preparations, as he would play a central role in the ceremonies. Royal workshops created elaborate decorations, and sculptors might carve new images of Hapi or repair old ones. When the first signs of the flood appeared, the Nile's water rising and beginning to spread across the banks, the festival officially began. The celebrations lasted several days and involved multiple types of rituals and activities. At the royal level, the pharaoh would lead ceremonies at major temples in Memphis, Thebes, or wherever the royal court happened to be that season. These ceremonies followed the standard pattern we've discussed: purification of the priests, offerings to the gods, prayers, and hymns. But the flood festival included unique elements not present in daily temple rituals. One of the most important was the ritual cutting of the dike. Throughout the year, Egyptian farmers built and maintained a system of irrigation canals and dikes that controlled how water flowed from the Nile to the fields. During flood season, certain dikes needed to be broken to allow the water to spread properly. The ceremonial cutting of the first dike was performed by the pharaoh or a high priest, symbolizing royal control over the waters and divine approval of the flood. This dike-cutting ceremony had specific procedures. The pharaoh, wearing the full regalia of office, including the double crown representing Upper and Lower Egypt, would approach the chosen dike. Priests would precede him, chanting hymns to Hapi and other water deities. Musicians would play drums, harps, and flutes. At the appropriate moment, determined by astronomical observations and priestly calculations, the pharaoh would strike the dike with a ceremonial hoe or break it with a special staff. Water would rush through the opening, flooding the fields, and the crowd would cheer. This moment represented the renewal of the sacred contract between the pharaoh, the gods, and the land of Egypt. At temples throughout Egypt, simultaneous ceremonies were held. The largest and most elaborate were at temples dedicated to water deities or to major gods like Amun-Ra, who controlled natural cycles. At Karnak Temple, priests would lead the statue of Amun out of the sanctuary and carry it in procession around the sacred lake. This wasn't a small statue. The main cult statue of Amun could be quite large and would be carried in an elaborate boat-shaped shrine borne on poles by multiple priests. This procession around the sacred lake symbolized the sun god's journey across the sky and through the underworld, but during the flood festival it also represented the god's blessing of the waters. As the statue passed, priests would pour libations of water from the sacred lake, letting it flow back into the lake in a circular offering. This ritual recycling of water, taking it from the sacred source, offering it to the god, and returning it to the source, symbolized the eternal cycle of water. Rain falling, rivers flowing, water evaporating, clouds forming, rain falling again. Common people participated in the flood festival in their own ways. Village communities would gather at the riverbank to watch the waters rise. Families would bring offerings to throw into the Nile: food, flowers, small amulets, and coins if they could afford them. These offerings weren't directed to the major gods in their temples, but to the river itself, to Hapi directly, and to the various spirits believed to inhabit the water. Music and dancing were central to the flood celebrations. Professional musicians and dancers performed at temples, but ordinary people danced and sang too. The music was joyful and lively, with steady drum beats, the bright tones of flutes and harps, and the distinctive rattling sound of sistrums. Women would sing songs praising Hapi and thanking the Nile for its bounty. Some of these songs have survived in fragmentary form. "Hail to you, Hapi! You come forth from the earth and come to nourish Egypt. Your nature is hidden from mankind, O mysterious one who comes in darkness by day, when it is said that you flow at night." Special foods were prepared for the flood festival. Beer was brewed in large quantities. Beer was the everyday drink of ancient Egyptians, consumed by everyone from children to pharaohs, and festivals required even more than usual. Bakers worked overtime, producing special festival breads, some shaped like animals or symbols, others sweetened with honey and dates. Butchers slaughtered cattle, goats, and sheep for feast meat, something most ordinary Egyptians didn't eat regularly. Fish caught from the newly flooding Nile were grilled and shared among communities. One fascinating aspect of the flood festival was the temporary breaking down of some social barriers. While Egypt was definitely a hierarchical society with distinct classes, the flood festival included moments when everyone participated together. Rich and poor alike watched the water rise. Nobles threw offerings into the Nile alongside farmers. The shared relief and joy at seeing the flood arrive created a sense of common purpose that transcended daily social divisions. The flood festival was also a time for oracles and divination. Priests would observe the flood carefully, noting how quickly the water rose, how high it got, its colour and clarity. These observations weren't just measurements, they were interpreted as messages from the gods about the coming year. Clear, steady flooding indicated divine favour and promised a good harvest. If the water was muddy or rose erratically, priests might prescribe additional offerings or rituals to correct whatever had displeased the gods. The Nilometers we discussed earlier played a crucial role during the flood festival. Throughout the flood season, measurements would be taken daily and announced publicly. Temple heralds would proclaim the water level, and scribes would record it for official archives. When the water reached the optimal level, around 16 cubits or 8 meters, special celebrations would be held to mark this perfect flood. If the water seemed likely to fall short or rise too high, additional prayers and offerings would be made to try to influence the outcome. Children had their own roles in the flood festival. In some regions, children would create small toy boats from papyrus reeds and float them on the rising waters, a playful activity that also had religious meaning. The boats represented the sunboat of Ra and the ceremonial boats that carried god statues. Floating a boat successfully was seen as good luck. Children also helped gather flowers and greenery to decorate temples and homes during the festival. The goddess Isis had her own special celebration tied to the Nile flood. In some traditions, the flood was attributed to Isis's tears, as we mentioned earlier. During the flood festival, women had a special role in honoring Isis through rituals that included pouring water libations, singing laments that recalled Isis's grief for Osiris, and ultimately celebrating her triumph in resurrecting him. These rituals acknowledged sorrow and loss, but focused on renewal and rebirth, mirroring the flood's transformation of barren fields into fertile farmland. Regional variations existed throughout Egypt. In the Delta region in the north, where the Nile split into multiple branches and the flood dynamics were different, celebrations might focus more on maritime aspects and fishing rituals. In Upper Egypt in the south, where the Nile was a single strong river and the flood arrived earlier and more dramatically, celebrations might be more intense and focus more on agricultural aspects. In oasis communities far from the Nile, the flood festival was celebrated anyway, recognizing the Nile's importance even to those who didn't live directly on its banks. The flood festival wasn't just a single event but a season-long series of celebrations. As the flood waters spread and peaked, then gradually receded over the following months, different ceremonies marked each stage. There were rituals for the peak of the flood, rituals for when the waters began to recede, and rituals for when the land re-emerged ready for planting. Each stage had its own significance and its own prayers to ensure the process continued favourably. Royal inscriptions often mentioned the flood festival and the pharaoh's role in it. Kings boasted about the successful floods during their reigns as evidence of their divine favour and their ability to maintain Ma'at. Temple walls were carved with scenes showing the pharaoh offering to Hapi or participating in flood ceremonies. These weren't just historical records, they were magical texts that helped ensure future floods would continue to bless Egypt. The flood festival was also politically significant. It was a time when the pharaoh's legitimacy was on display. A good flood, during a king's reign, confirmed his right to rule and his good standing with the gods. A bad flood could be interpreted as divine displeasure with the ruler, potentially encouraging rebellion or political instability. Pharaohs took the flood very seriously and invested heavily in the festivals, both for genuine religious reasons and for political propaganda. Foreign visitors to Egypt were often amazed by the flood festival. Greeks and Romans who visited or lived in Egypt wrote about the celebrations, describing the elaborate processions, the public joy, and the central importance of the Nile. These foreign accounts sometimes misunderstood the religious aspects, but they accurately captured the sense that the Nile flood was the defining event of the Egyptian year, the moment when the country's fate for the coming year was determined. The festival eventually evolved and adapted over Egypt's long history. During the Ptolemaic period, when Greeks ruled Egypt, elements of Greek water festivals were incorporated, creating a syncretic celebration that honoured both Egyptian and Greek traditions. During the Roman period, the flood festival continued, but with Roman elements added. Even after Egypt became Christian and later Muslim, echoes of the ancient flood festival persisted in water-blessing ceremonies and celebrations that continued to mark the Nile's rise. Today, modern Egypt still celebrates the Nile with the Wafa el-Nil festival, held every August. While the Aswan High Dam has controlled the Nile's flooding since 1970, eliminating the natural flood cycle, the cultural memory of the ancient flood festival persists. Modern celebrations include music, dancing, river ceremonies, and the floating of offerings on the Nile, connecting contemporary Egyptians with their ancestors who celebrated the same river thousands of years ago. Understanding the flood festival helps us appreciate how thoroughly water shaped Egyptian culture. The river wasn't just a resource to be managed, it was a divine presence to be celebrated, honored, and thanked. The flood wasn't just a useful natural event, it was an annual miracle that required religious devotion, community participation, and royal leadership. Water rituals weren't isolated practices, they were woven into the fabric of Egyptian life at every level, from the pharaoh's palace to the farmer's field. The flood festival also reveals the Egyptian understanding of the relationship between humans and nature. The Egyptians didn't see themselves as separate from or superior to the natural world. They saw themselves as participants in natural cycles, dependent on the cooperation of divine forces that controlled nature. The flood festival was an annual acknowledgement of this dependence, a collective prayer for continued blessing, and a celebration of the partnership between gods, pharaoh, and people that made Egyptian civilization possible. Chapter 7. Women, Wellness, and Water Rituals. Who were the women who served as priestesses in ancient Egypt's water rituals? When we think about ancient Egyptian religion, we often imagine male priests, but women played crucial and powerful roles in religious life, particularly in rituals involving water, purification, and the worship of goddesses. Understanding these women's roles gives us a fuller picture of how water rituals functioned in Egyptian society and reveals surprisingly progressive aspects of Egyptian culture. Women could hold priestly titles in ancient Egypt, though their roles and responsibilities changed over time. During the Old Kingdom around 2686 to 2181 BCE, many women served as priestesses for various deities, both goddesses and gods. By the New Kingdom, around 1550 to 1077 BCE, most female religious roles were specifically connected to goddess worship, though there were exceptions. The most common title for a female priest was Hemet Netja, which translates as God's servant or God's wife, not in a sexual sense but as a religious functionary. The goddess Hathor had the most extensive female priesthood. Hathor was the goddess of love, beauty, music, joy, and motherhood. But she was also fierce and powerful, capable of transforming into the warrior goddess Sekhmet. Temples dedicated to Hathor, particularly the Great Temple at Dendera, employed large staffs of female priests who performed daily rituals involving water purification, offerings, music, and dance. Priestesses of Hathor went through the same rigorous purification requirements as male priests. They bathed multiple times daily in sacred pools, using water and natron to cleanse themselves before entering sacred spaces. They wore pure white linen garments that were washed frequently in sacred water. They shaved their heads or wore wigs to maintain the hairless state associated with ritual purity. In every practical way, their purification standards matched those of their male counterparts. But priestesses of Hathor had unique responsibilities related specifically to their goddess. They were trained musicians who played the sistrum, the sacred rattle associated with Hathor. The sistrum had a distinctive rattling sound produced by metal rods passing through metal loops in its frame. When shaken rhythmically, the sistrum produced music that was believed to please Hathor and drive away evil spirits. Priestesses would shake sistrums while performing water libations, creating a multisensory ritual experience combining sound, movement, and the flowing of water. Dance was another crucial element of Hathor worship that fell primarily to priestesses. These weren't casual performances but sacred dances with specific choreography and meaning. Some dances depicted Hathor's mythology, including her transformation from the fierce lioness Sekhmet back into the gentle cow goddess after being soothed with beer. The story goes that Ra sent Sekhmet to punish humanity for disrespect, but she became so bloodthirsty that Ra feared she would destroy everyone. To stop her, the gods flooded the land with beer dyed red to look like blood. Sekhmet drank the beer, became intoxicated and pacified, and transformed back into Hathor. This myth was enacted in ritual form, and priestesses played key roles. They would pour libations of beer and water during the ceremony, sing hymns about Hathor's mercy, and perform dances celebrating her transformation from violence to gentleness. This ritual took place during the Festival of Drunkenness, an actual Egyptian holiday where ritualized intoxication was part of worship. Priestesses would drink wine or beer as part of the ceremony, achieving a mildly altered state considered sacred and conducive to communion with the goddess. After these rituals involving alcohol, priestesses would undergo additional purification with water. They would wash in special pools or basins to cleanse themselves of the ritual intoxication and prepare to return to regular temple duties. This cycle of purposeful impurity, drinking alcohol, followed by purification, bathing in sacred water, demonstrates the complex and nuanced understanding Egyptians had of ritual states. Women of royal rank held the most prestigious religious titles. Queens often bore the title God's Wife of Amun, particularly during the New Kingdom and late period. This wasn't just an honorary title, it came with real religious authority, extensive temple estates, significant income, and large staffs of subordinate priests and priestesses. The God's Wife of Amun performed daily rituals in the Temple of Amun at Karnak, including the water-based purification and offering ceremonies we've discussed. Some gods' wives of Amun accumulated such power that they rivaled the pharaohs themselves. Amenhotep I and Shepenwepet II, who held this title during the 25th dynasty, controlled vast wealth and influenced major political decisions. They underwent the same bathing rituals in the sacred lake at Karnak as male priests, but as the highest-ranking religious figures, they had exclusive access to certain areas and ceremonies. When a god's wife of Amun entered the sacred lake at dawn, other priests would wait until she had completed her purification before entering the water themselves. Ordinary women who weren't priestesses also participated in water rituals, particularly at home and in community settings. Women were primarily responsible for fetching water for household use, which meant they interacted with the Nile or with local wells daily. This practical activity had spiritual dimensions. Drawing water from the Nile was like receiving a gift from the gods, and women might say prayers of thanks while filling their jars. Women performed purification rituals before and after major life events. During menstruation, women were considered ritually impure and would abstain from temple activities, but afterwards they would purify themselves by bathing. After childbirth, women underwent an extended purification period, traditionally 14 days after the birth of a girl or 7 days after the birth of a boy, reflecting cultural gender biases of the time. At the end of this period, the new mother would bathe thoroughly and might visit a temple to make offerings of thanksgiving to deities associated with childbirth, particularly Tauret and Bes. The goddess Tauret, depicted as a pregnant hippopotamus standing upright, was invoked by women during pregnancy and childbirth. Women would wear amulets showing Tauret and would sprinkle water in the 4 corners of the birthing room before labor began, asking Tauret to protect them. After a successful birth, offerings of water and milk would be poured out in thanks. The connection between water, fertility, and Tauret was natural hippopotamuses live in water and water is associated with the amniotic fluid of the womb. Women also used water in beauty and wellness practices that had both practical and spiritual dimensions. The most famous Egyptian beauty ritual is Cleopatra's legendary milk baths, though historians debate whether she actually did this. However, wealthy Egyptian women definitely did use milk and honey in their bathing water, and some added essential oils and flower petals. These substances softened skin and provided pleasant fragrances, but they also had symbolic meanings. Milk represented fertility and nourishment, honey represented divine sweetness and preservation. Archaeological evidence from ancient Egyptian sites includes cosmetic vessels, bathing implements, and chemical analyses of residues that tell us what women used in their personal care routines. They washed with water and natron, smoothed their skin with oils including moringa oil and castor oil, used clay masks, applied kohl eyeliner made from ground minerals, reddened their lips and cheeks with ochre, and hennaed their hands and feet. After applying cosmetics, women would sprinkle themselves with water infused with flower petals. Lotus, lily, and mandrake were particular favourites, creating a light, refreshing fragrance. Natural hot springs and mineral pools were sought after for their healing properties. The most famous is Cleopatra's spring in Siwa Oasis, a natural pool fed by underground springs where warm, mineral-rich water bubbles up constantly. While we can't prove Cleopatra actually bathed there, Egyptians certainly recognized the therapeutic benefits of mineral springs. The water at Siwa contains dissolved salts and minerals that can help with skin conditions, joint pain, and general relaxation. Women would travel significant distances to bathe in such springs, believing the water had healing powers granted by the gods. Women shared water rituals and wellness knowledge across generations. Mothers taught daughters how to properly wash, which oils to use for different purposes, how to make cosmetics, and which prayers to say during purification. This oral tradition passed down practical information alongside spiritual teachings. A grandmother might teach her granddaughter, always face the rising sun when you wash your face in the morning, and thank Ra for the new day. Use cool water to wake your skin, then oil to protect it from the sun. Female communal bathing was common in ancient Egypt. Women would gather at the riverbank or at public wells not just to draw water but to socialize, share news, and help each other with tasks like washing clothes or bathing children. These informal gatherings were important social institutions where women built relationships, settled disputes, arranged marriages, and supported each other through life's challenges. The water source became a female-dominated space, a break from home and from male oversight. Midwives, who were always women, had special water rituals they performed. Before attending a birth, a midwife would purify herself by bathing and changing into clean clothes. During labour, she would periodically wash her hands in water mixed with specific herbs believed to promote safe delivery. After the birth, she would wash the baby with warm water, often water that had been blessed at a temple or water mixed with herbs like chamomile or fennel. This first bath was both practical, cleaning the baby, and spiritual, welcoming the baby into the world under divine protection. Women, musicians, and dancers who performed at festivals and religious ceremonies underwent water purifications before performances. These women weren't necessarily full-time priestesses but were hired by temples for specific events. Before performing, they would wash at the temple's purification facilities, dress in special costumes, often quite revealing by modern standards, but considered appropriate for festive performance, and apply cosmetics and oils. Their performances, particularly in honour of Hathor, were considered acts of worship that required ritual purity. Noble women and wealthy merchant women had private bathing facilities in their homes. Archaeological excavations have uncovered bathroom areas in elite houses, including stone basins, water drainage systems, and nearby storage areas for oils and cosmetics. These women could perform daily purification rituals privately rather than at public water sources. However, they still needed to visit temples for major purifications and would use the temple's sacred water for the most important rituals. Women who had experienced the death of a family member underwent specific purification rituals. As professional mourners, women would intentionally make themselves impure during funerary rituals by throwing dirt on themselves, tearing their clothes, and generally expressing extreme grief. After the funeral, they would undergo thorough purification, bathing with natron, shaving their heads if they had chosen to let hair grow during the mourning period, changing into clean clothes, and making offerings at temples. This transition from ritual impurity back to purity marked the end of the intense mourning period. The relationship between women and water in ancient Egypt reflected broader gender roles while also providing women with spaces and rituals specifically their own. While Egyptian society was patriarchal in many ways, women had more legal rights and social freedoms than women in many other ancient civilizations. They could own property, conduct business, initiate divorce, and hold religious offices. Water rituals were one area where women's authority was recognized and respected. Female deities connected to water reinforced women's association with these rituals. Besides Hathor, there was Isis, whose tears caused the Nile flood. There was Nut, the sky goddess who gave birth to the sun each day and was sometimes shown pouring water from jars. There was Satet, a goddess of the Nile floods specifically at the Aswan region, shown wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt and carrying a bow and arrows. These powerful goddesses provided divine models for women's participation in water rituals and religious life generally. Women's health concerns were addressed through water rituals and herbal treatments. The Kahun Gynecological Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts in existence, includes treatments for various women's health issues that involve bathing, water-based medicines, and vaginal douches using water mixed with specific herbs. While some of these treatments seem strange to modern medicine, others showed genuine understanding of feminine health, and the emphasis on cleanliness and water-based therapies was ahead of its time. During religious festivals, women had prominent public roles that combined celebration with water rituals. In the Opet festival, which involved a procession carrying the statue of Amun from Karnak to Luxor Temple, women, musicians and dancers led parts of the procession, shaking sistrums, singing, and stopping at stations along the way to pour water libations. Their participation wasn't passive or merely decorative. They were performing essential religious functions that allowed the festival to proceed correctly. The legacy of Egyptian women's water rituals persisted beyond ancient times. Early Christian communities in Egypt, the Copts, maintained some traditional practices, including ritual bathing for purification, though adapted to Christian theology. Medieval Egyptian women continued to value water-based beauty and wellness treatments, passing down recipes and techniques that ultimately influenced Mediterranean and Arab beauty traditions. The connection between women, water, and wellness that was so central to ancient Egyptian culture rippled forward through history, influencing cultures across time and space. Chapter 8: Bringing Ancient Wisdom into Modern Life. How can we connect with these ancient water rituals today? You might be thinking that ancient Egyptian practices have no relevance to modern life, but that's not entirely true. While we can't recreate the exact spiritual and cultural context of ancient Egypt, we can learn from their understanding of water as a tool for physical cleansing, mental clarity, and spiritual renewal. The psychological and physiological benefits the Egyptians experienced from their water rituals are still accessible to us today. Let's start with the most basic element, the purposeful bath. The ancient Egyptians didn't rush through bathing as many of us do today, treating it as just a hygienic necessity to get through quickly. Instead, they approached bathing as a ritual, a sacred act that deserved time and attention. We can adopt this mindset. Instead of a quick shower before rushing off to work, What if you took an extra 5 or 10 minutes and treated your morning wash as a ritual? The practical steps are simple. Before you begin, set an intention. The Egyptians bathed with the specific purpose of purifying themselves to serve the gods. Your intention might be different. I am washing away yesterday's stress, or I am cleansing my mind to focus on today's challenges, or I am preparing myself to be present with my family. Having an intention transforms a mundane activity into a meaningful practice. Pay attention to the sensory experience of water. Feel the temperature on your skin. Notice how water flows over your body. Listen to the sound it makes. The Egyptians were deeply aware of water's sensory qualities, its coolness, its sound, its ability to make you feel simultaneously relaxed and refreshed. Modern neuroscience supports what the Egyptians knew intuitively. Focusing on sensory experiences activates your parasympathetic nervous system, triggering relaxation responses and reducing stress hormones. You don't need the Nile River or Natron to practice water-based purification. Your bathroom sink or shower can become your sacred space. If you want to enhance the experience, add simple, natural elements. A few drops of essential oil in your bath water can elevate the experience. Lavender for relaxation, peppermint for invigoration, frankincense to connect with ancient traditions. These aren't just pleasant scents. Aromatherapy has documented effects on mood and stress levels. Consider creating a personal bathing ritual for special occasions or when you need it most. When you've had a particularly stressful day, when you're facing a big challenge tomorrow, or when you simply need to reset your mental state, give yourself permission to take a longer bath or shower and make it ceremonial. Light a candle representing fire, another sacred element. Play music that helps you feel calm or focused. If you're comfortable with it, say a few words of intention out loud or in your mind. These small acts transform bathing from a routine into a ritual. The Egyptian practice of purifying with intention before entering sacred space translates directly to modern life. Before an important meeting, a difficult conversation, or a creative project, take a few moments to wash your hands with cool water while focusing on your intention for the upcoming activity. This simple act serves as a transition ritual, helping you mentally shift from whatever you were doing before to the task at hand. Sports psychologists call this centering, and it's a powerful tool for peak performance. The Egyptian emphasis on cleansing at transitions upon waking, before meals, after work, before sleep, can be adapted to modern routines. In many cultures, ritual hand-washing before meals remains common, often with religious significance. You can adopt this practice even without religious framing. Taking 30 seconds to wash your hands before eating, focusing on the sensation and being present in the moment, serves as a reset button for your nervous system and helps you approach your meal more mindfully. The concept of sacred space doesn't require a temple. You can designate an area of your home as your personal sanctuary, perhaps a corner of your bedroom, a spot in your garden, or even your bathroom, and keep it specifically for moments when you want to decompress, meditate, or just be quiet. The Egyptians understood that physical spaces could be charged with intention, and that entering such spaces in a purified state enhanced their effectiveness. Before entering your personal sanctuary, wash your face and hands as a transition ritual, marking the shift from ordinary space to sacred space. Egyptian priests bathed multiple times daily, which isn't practical for most modern people, but we can capture the spirit of this practice. Brief cold water rinses throughout the day can be remarkably refreshing. Splashing cold water on your face when you feel yourself getting drowsy or stressed provides an instant boost. Rinsing your hands and forearms under cool water for even 30 seconds can help you refocus when you're feeling scattered. These micro-rituals take almost no time but can significantly improve your mental state. The Egyptian sacred lake, where priests bathed before dawn, was an outdoor water feature connected to nature and the sky. While most of us don't have access to natural bodies of water for daily bathing, we can seek out water in nature when possible. Swimming in a lake, ocean, or river, where safe and legal, connects you to that ancient experience of immersing yourself in natural water. If you live near a natural water source, making time to visit it regularly, and even just sitting by it, can provide some of the contemplative benefits the Egyptians experienced at the sacred lake. Public swimming pools, hot springs, and spas offer another way to engage with water in a more expansive way than home bathing allows. The social aspect of these spaces also connects to Egyptian practice. The Nile riverbanks and public wells were community gathering places where people connected with each other while interacting with water. Don't underestimate the psychological value of these social water spaces. Floating in a pool, soaking in a hot spring, or even sitting in a sauna followed by a cold plunge engages your body and mind in ways that can be genuinely restorative. The use of salt in bathing, which connects to the Egyptian use of natron, remains popular today. Epsom salt baths, actually magnesium sulfate, not the same as natron sodium carbonate, but similar in concept, are widely recommended for muscle relaxation and stress relief. The magnesium can be absorbed through the skin, and the ritual of drawing a bath, adding salts, and soaking for 20 to 30 minutes provides both physical and psychological benefits. Some people add sea salt or Dead Sea salt to baths, which is closer to the mineral composition of natron and can have skin-benefiting effects. For those interested in deeper connection to Egyptian wisdom, studying and adapting their approach to morning and evening rituals can be transformative. The Egyptians saw morning as a rebirth awakening from the small death of sleep, emerging from dreams into the day. Their morning purifications prepared them for this rebirth. Consider developing a morning ritual that includes water. Upon waking, drink a glass of water. Our bodies are dehydrated after sleep. Then wash your face and hands with awareness, perhaps saying an affirmation or expressing gratitude for the new day. Evening rituals serve to release the day's events and prepare for rest. The Egyptians believed sleep was when your soul traveled to other realms, so proper preparation was essential. Before bed, wash your face, hands, and feet. As you do so, consciously acknowledge that you're releasing the day, the successes, the failures, the stresses, the joys. Imagine the water carrying away what you don't need to hold on to overnight. This simple practice can significantly improve sleep quality because it creates a clear boundary between daytime consciousness and nighttime rest. The psychological principle underlying all these practices is ritual marking, using specific actions to signal to your brain that you're transitioning between different states of being. The Egyptians mastered this thousands of years ago without having modern neuroscience to explain it. When you consistently use water rituals to mark transitions from sleep to waking, from work to home, from stress to calm, your brain learns these patterns and begins to shift states more easily when you perform the ritual. Mindfulness practices and water rituals complement each other beautifully. Mindfulness teaches present moment awareness without judgment. When you combine mindfulness principles with water rituals, you create a practice that engages both body and mind. Try this. Next time you wash your hands, stay completely present for the entire experience. Notice the temperature of the water, how it feels on your skin, the sound it makes, the visual pattern of water flowing. When your mind wanders, and it will, gently bring it back to the sensory experience. This is meditation in motion, and it's exactly what the Egyptian priests were doing when they performed their elaborate purification rituals, staying completely present in the act of cleansing. You can also adapt the Egyptian practice of water offerings. The Egyptians poured libations to gods and ancestors, but the underlying principle expressing gratitude or intention through the ritual pouring of water doesn't require specific religious beliefs. Some modern people keep a small bowl or cup of water on a personal altar or in a special place, changing the water daily as a practice of renewal. Others pour water onto the earth in their garden while thinking of people they're grateful for or causes they support. The physical act of pouring, combined with focused intention, creates a memorable moment that's more psychologically powerful than merely thinking grateful thoughts. Connecting with water in nature provides benefits that the Egyptians knew well. They saw the Nile as the center of their world, the source of life itself, and they spent time near it daily. Modern research confirms that spending time near water, whether ocean, lake, river, or fountain, has measurable positive effects on mental health. The sound of water has calming properties. The negative ions produced by moving water may influence mood. The color blue, associated with water and sky, has been shown to lower blood pressure and heart rate. If you can't access natural water features, even images of water or recordings of water sounds can provide some benefit. Creating a water feature in your home or garden, even a small fountain, connects to the Egyptian practice of bringing sacred water into living spaces. The sound of flowing water masks disturbing noises, creates white noise that aids concentration and sleep, and provides a focal point for meditation. Indoor fountains have been used for centuries in various cultures, from Egyptian temples to Japanese gardens to modern office buildings, because water's presence changes the atmosphere of a space. Hydration itself can be treated as a ritual practice. The Egyptians understood that water sustained life, and they gave thanks when drinking. We know more now about hydration's crucial role in brain function, physical performance, and overall health, yet many people remain chronically dehydrated. Instead of mindlessly gulping water when thirsty, try drinking water with awareness. Before drinking, pause for a moment. Acknowledge that this water is sustaining your life. Feel gratitude that clean water is available to you, which is not true for everyone on earth. Then drink slowly, noticing the sensation of water entering your body. This simple mindfulness practice increases the likelihood you'll stay properly hydrated because you're creating a positive association with drinking water. For parents, teaching children about water's importance through simple rituals creates a foundation for lifelong healthy habits. Children naturally love water, they play in it, splash it, enjoy baths. You can enhance this natural affinity by adding simple ritual elements. Before bath time, help your child set an intention. Let's wash away the day's worries so you can sleep peacefully. During the bath, talk about how water helps us grow, just like it helps plants grow. After the bath, wrap them in a towel and acknowledge the transition. Now you're clean and ready for dreams. These small practices teach children that self-care is important and that transitions deserve attention. The Egyptian emphasis on purity before approaching the divine translates to preparing yourself before important moments. Whether or not you're religious, you likely have moments, places, or activities you consider meaningful or special. Before engaging with these, use water as a preparation tool. Going to visit someone important? Wash your hands first. About to work on a creative project? Splash water on your face. Starting a meditation session? Drink a glass of water and consciously clear your mind. These preparatory water rituals enhance whatever comes next because they signal to your brain that something significant is about to happen. One powerful aspect of Egyptian water rituals was their communal nature. The flood festival involved entire communities celebrating together. Temple rituals had audiences even when only priests performed the central actions. We can seek similar community connection through water. Beach cleanups, for example, connect people to water while serving an important environmental purpose. Group swimming, water aerobics classes, or even book clubs that meet at a lakeside cafe create community bonds in the presence of water. There's something about water that encourages connection and conversation. The Egyptians knew this when they gathered at the Nile's edge, and it remains true today. For those dealing with grief, the Egyptian funerary water rituals offer a model for processing loss. The physical act of washing, combined with conscious intention to honour and release the deceased, provides a structured way to engage with grief. If you're mourning someone, you might create a simple water ritual. Light a candle near a bowl of water, speak to or about your loved one, then wash your hands in the water while consciously acknowledging both your grief and your continuing life. Pour the water onto the earth or into a living plant, symbolizing how death feeds new life. This won't eliminate grief, but it provides a concrete way to process it that our therapy, talking heavy culture sometimes overlooks. The seasonal rhythm of Egyptian life, organized around the Nile's flood cycle, offers lessons for modern people who often feel disconnected from natural cycles. Most of us don't depend on seasonal floods, but we can still honor seasons through water rituals. Mark the spring equinox with a special bath that celebrates renewal. Celebrate summer solstice by swimming or playing in water. Acknowledge autumn's arrival by gathering rainwater for watering plants. Honor winter solstice by taking a hot bath in the longest night. These seasonal water rituals reconnect you to Earth's rhythms, combating the modern sense of time as an undifferentiated flow of identical days. Ultimately, the gift of ancient Egyptian water rituals isn't a specific set of actions you must perform exactly as they did. The gift is the understanding that water can be more than just H2O, that washing can be more than just cleaning dirt off your body, that bathing can be a sacred act that tends to your mental and spiritual well-being alongside your physical cleanliness. The Egyptians developed elaborate systems of water rituals because they worked. They helped people feel better, clearer, more prepared for life's challenges, and more connected to something larger than themselves. You don't need to believe in Egyptian gods to benefit from Egyptian wisdom about water. You just need to approach water with intention and respect, to slow down enough to experience it fully, and to recognize that this simple molecule that covers most of Earth's surface and makes up most of your body is indeed worthy of reverence. When you cup water in your hands and watch it flow between your fingers, you're connecting to the same eternal substance that flowed through the Nile thousands of years ago, that bathed Egyptian priests at dawn, that blessed pharaohs and commoners alike. That was the first thing that made life possible on this planet. The next time you turn on a tap and water flows out effortlessly, pause for just a moment. The ancient Egyptians would have seen this as a profound miracle water, appearing instantly whenever needed, clean and safe to drink. We've become so accustomed to this luxury that we forget it really is miraculous. Take a moment to feel gratitude for the water that sustains you, to appreciate the long history of humans working with and worshipping water, to connect yourself to that ancient lineage. Then let the water flow over your hands, and as you wash, set an intention for what you want to release or what you want to invite into your life. This simple act, done with awareness, is all it takes to make water sacred again, to transform a routine into a ritual, to bring ancient Egyptian wisdom into your modern life. The waters still whisper if we slow down enough to listen. The ancient Egyptians understood something we're only beginning to rediscover in our modern rush, that caring for our physical, mental, and spiritual well-being doesn't require complicated technology or expensive products. Sometimes all we need is water, intention, and the willingness to treat ordinary moments as sacred. The priests who bathed in the sacred lake at Karnak at dawn, the women who gathered at the Nile's edge to fill their water jars, the mourners who poured libations for their dead, the festival celebrants who threw flowers into the flood, all were participating in a culture that saw water not as a commodity, but as the essence of life itself, deserving of respect, celebration, and gratitude. 3,000 years have passed since Egypt's golden age, But water remains water. It still flows, still cleanses, still sustains. The Nile still rises, though now controlled by dams. The sun still rises over Egypt's temples, though now tourists photograph them rather than priests making offerings. But the fundamental truth the Egyptians knew remains valid. Water has power to transform us if we approach it with the right mindset. As you go through your days, look for opportunities to connect with water mindfully. Notice rain falling. Really taste the water you drink. Feel the shower washing over you in the morning. Watch sunlight dancing on water's surface. These small moments of attention accumulate, gradually shifting your relationship with this remarkable substance from taking it for granted to seeing it as the miracle it truly is. The whispering wells of ancient Egypt haven't run dry. Their wisdom flows still, waiting for us to cup our hands, to bow our heads, to remember that some of the most profound truths are as simple and essential as water itself. The ancient practices may have faded, the temples may stand in ruins, the priestly orders may have dissolved millennia ago, but the water endures, and with it, the possibility of finding in a simple splash of water on your face the same clarity, the same renewal, the same connection to something larger than yourself that an Egyptian priest experienced at dawn in the sacred lake 3,000 years ago. This is the gift of the whispering wells. Not a complex system to master, not a religion to adopt, not an ancient mystery to solve, but a simple invitation to pay attention, to be present, to honor the water that gives you life by receiving it consciously and gratefully. The Egyptians built a great civilization in the desert because they understood water's true value. We who have water so abundantly available that we barely think about it might benefit from remembering what they knew, that every drop is precious, every washing can be sacred, and every moment of connection with water is an opportunity to return to the source, to cleanse not just our bodies but our minds and hearts, to prepare ourselves not for serving ancient gods but for living our own best lives with presence, purpose, and peace. The water is ready. It has been waiting for you all this time. All you need to do is approach it with intention, respect, and openness, and it will share its ancient wisdom with you, one sacred drop at a time.